The sky above Northbridge High was the kind of gray that never seemed to lift, hanging low over the rooftops like a tired sigh. Inside the corridors, the buzz of teenage voices bounced off the walls. Laughter, gossip, and the constant hum of lives that hadn't yet learned how fragile they could be. Emily Parker was among them, her laughter carrying a confidence that seemed effortless. She was one of those girls everyone noticed, not because she tried but because she didn't have to. Her wavy brown hair fell neatly over her blazer collar, and her green eyes were always alive with a spark of curiosity, or mischief, depending on who you asked. Daniel Carter, on the other hand, was invisible to most. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. His uniform was always a bit wrinkled, his tie slightly loose. His shoes, worn at the edges, hinted at a home where things weren't replaced until they absolutely had to be. He walked with a kind of cautious presence, as if trying not to take up too much space in a world that hadn't given him much room. They shared a few classes: English, maths, history. Emily barely noticed him, except when he'd answer questions in that calm, thoughtful tone that made even the teacher pause. He wasn't the kind of student people bullied openly. He was the kind they simply overlooked. But there were moments, small ones, when Daniel's eyes lingered on Emily longer than he meant to. Not out of infatuation, at least not entirely, but out of wonder. She seemed to live so easily, laughing with friends at the back of the class, sharing secrets, living a life that looked like sunlight. Emily, of course, had her own struggles, insecurities hidden behind that easy laugh, but Daniel couldn't know that. One afternoon, during a group project in English, fate decided to cross their paths a little closer. Mrs. Henderson, the teacher, paired students randomly. "Emily Parker, you'll be with Daniel Carter," she said, glancing over her clipboard. Emily's face fell slightly. Her friends giggled behind her. "Oh, great," she muttered under her breath. Daniel pretended not to hear, but the words lodged in him like a splinter. They worked together after school in the library. Emily did most of the talking, Daniel most of the writing. It was awkward at first, her impatience, his politeness, but somewhere between Shakespeare and a pile of rough drafts, something shifted. She noticed the way he thought, careful, deep, like he weighed every word. He noticed how she filled silence with energy, refusing to let the world dull her edges. For a moment, they saw each other as something more than their reputations. Still, Emily was 16. Appearances mattered. When her friends teased her about studying with Daniel the quiet one, she laughed along. "It's just a project," she said, brushing it off. She didn't see the hurt in his eyes when he overheard her. Weeks turned into months. Their project earned top marks, but whatever fragile bridge had begun between them crumbled under the weight of teenage pride. One rainy Thursday, Daniel didn't show up to school, nor the next day, nor the week after. There were rumors that his family had moved, that his father had lost his job. No one really knew. No one really asked. Emily forgot about him, as people often forget those who never made enough noise to be remembered. Years passed. London changed as cities do. Skyscrapers rose, old corners vanished, and life pressed forward like an unrelenting tide. Emily, now 26, worked in a marketing firm near Canary Wharf. Her days were a blur of deadlines, emails, and endless cups of coffee. She lived alone in a modest flat in Camden, with plants she often forgot to water and books she never quite finished. Success had found her, but peace had not. There was always something missing, a quiet ache she couldn't name. Sometimes on her morning commute, she thought about people from school, where they might be now, what paths their lives had taken. Daniel's name would flicker faintly in her mind, like a half-remembered song. But she'd shake it off. Life had moved on. She didn't know that, somewhere across the city, Daniel Carter was still there, alive, grown and changed. He had become a paramedic. The quiet boy had turned into a man who ran toward chaos when others ran away. He lived in a small flat in East London. His days filled with flashing lights, sirens, and the fragile line between life and death. He didn't think much about school. But sometimes when he treated someone who reminded him of the past, confident eyes, familiar laughter, he wondered what had become of Emily Parker. And so, two lives moved separately through the same city, unaware that fate, patient and persistent, was quietly setting its stage once more. One Friday night in late November, the rain returned. The kind of London rain that turned streets into mirrors and made headlights blur like ghosts. Emily was driving home after a late client dinner, her mind tired, her body heavier than she wanted to admit. She'd had a glass of wine, just one, but enough to dull her focus. The motorway was nearly empty, just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of rain on glass. Her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced for half a second, just half, and that's when the car ahead of her braked suddenly. Everything happened in a heartbeat. The screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, then silence. The world went black. Far across town, a radio crackled in the back of an ambulance. Multiple car collision on the M25. One vehicle overturned. Possible entrapment. Daniel grabbed his jacket before the words even finished. He didn't know that the woman trapped inside the silver hatchback, broken glass glinting under the streetlight, was the same girl who had once laughed at him across a classroom. The sound of sirens tore through the night. Rain hammered the road as the ambulance sped through slick lanes, the city lights flashing across the windscreen in streaks of red and blue. Daniel sat in the back, his hands tightening the straps on his gear. The call had come in serious. Multiple cars, one overturned, possible severe injury. When they arrived, chaos filled the motorway. Police lights, fire trucks, twisted metal. The familiar, terrible orchestra of disaster. Daniel's heartbeat slowed, as it always did when the world around him broke down. Years of experience had taught him to move through panic like a ghost. He stepped out into the cold rain, scanning the wreckage. A silver hatchback lay sideways against the barrier, smoke curling from under the hood. A young woman was trapped inside. "Driver's unresponsive," shouted one of the firefighters. Daniel rushed forward, kneeling by the shattered window. Through the glass, he could see her. Blood on her forehead, rainwater streaking down her pale skin. Her eyes fluttered faintly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called, his voice steady. No response. Just a faint movement of her lips. He motioned to the others. "We'll need the cutters. Get her out carefully. Neck brace ready." As they worked, time bent. Rain poured into the wreck as metal groaned under pressure. Daniel's gloved hands reached through the gap in the window, checking her pulse, weak but there. And then, as the firefighters peeled back the door, her head tilted slightly toward him. For a moment, her eyes opened, glassy, unfocused, and he saw them clearly for the first time. Green. Something in his chest stilled. That color, that same shade he'd once stared at from across a classroom desk. He blinked, the thought absurd, impossible. But when the rescue lights caught her face properly, recognition hit him like a blow. Emily Parker. She looked different, older, sharper, but it was her. There was no mistaking it. He froze only for a second. Then instinct took over. "Get the stretcher ready," he barked. "I need oxygen on her now." They lifted her from the car, the rain soaking her hair, blood mixing with water as it streamed down her cheek. Daniel kept his hand steady on her pulse the entire time, refusing to let go. In the ambulance, she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Emily," he whispered, unsure why he said her name out loud. "You're going to be all right. Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered. For a moment she focused on him, confused. "Who?" she whispered weakly, her voice breaking. He didn't answer. It didn't matter yet. The hospital lights were blinding. Daniel handed her over to the trauma team and stepped back, soaked to the bone, adrenaline still burning through him. He waited outside the room longer than he should have, watching doctors move around her like choreographed ghosts. When he finally left, he felt something heavy inside him. Not just exhaustion but memory. That face, that name. He'd never thought he'd see her again, not like this. He walked home through empty London streets, the rain easing into a drizzle. The city seemed quieter than usual. At a red light, he caught his reflection in a shop window, a man hardened by time, but still carrying the quiet eyes of that boy who once sat alone in school corridors. 3 days later, he found himself back at the hospital. He wasn't supposed to check on patients after transfer, but something kept pulling him back. She was awake now, sitting up in bed, her arm in a sling, bandages across her forehead. She stared out the window, lost in thought. He hesitated at the doorway. "Hi," he said softly. She turned, slowly at first, then fully, and her eyes widened in faint recognition. "You're the paramedic," she said. Her voice was soft, unsure. "Yeah," he replied. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up." She smiled weakly. "Better, I think. The doctors said I was lucky." He nodded. "You were." There was a pause, the kind that hangs heavy when two people sense something beneath the surface but can't name it yet. "You look familiar," she said after a moment, squinting slightly. "Have we met before?" Daniel hesitated. "Maybe," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." He didn't expect her to remember. Why would she? He'd been a shadow in her life, just another boy in the background of her teenage years. But she tilted her head, studying him. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, then surprise. "Wait," she murmured. "Daniel Carter. From Northbridge High." He smiled faintly. "That's me." Her eyes widened. I can't believe this." She looked down, a mix of embarrassment and shock coloring her expression. "After all these years." He shrugged gently. "London's a small world sometimes." There was so much she wanted to say. Apologies, explanations, but the words tangled in her throat. The irony was almost too much. The boy she'd once ignored had just saved her life. "Thank you," she said finally. Her voice trembled, genuine this time. "For everything." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. It's my job." But she could tell, from the quiet weight in his eyes, that it wasn't just duty. Days passed. Emily recovered quickly, but something inside her had shifted. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd looked at her, calm and distant, yet so steady. She asked the nurse one morning if she could speak to him again, but was told he'd already been reassigned. It bothered her more than she expected. When she finally left the hospital, London felt different, sharper, more fragile. Every siren she heard in the distance made her think of him. She went back to work, but the usual rush of deadlines and meetings no longer filled the hollow space inside. She started walking home instead of taking the tube, passing through quieter streets, hoping, though she couldn't explain why, that she might see him again. And then one evening she did. Outside a small cafe near King's Cross, Daniel was sitting with a coffee, scrolling through his phone. His paramedic jacket folded beside him. She hesitated, heart racing, then walked toward him. "Daniel!" He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, followed by a smile that reached his eyes. "Emily, you're looking better." She laughed softly. "Thanks to you." He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." She nodded, sitting down, still unsure of what to say. They talked for over an hour, about school, about work, about everything and nothing. For the first time she saw who he'd become. Calm, thoughtful, with a quiet strength she hadn't noticed before. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated. "You know," she said softly, "I never really said it properly before. I'm sorry for how I was back then. You didn't deserve that." Daniel looked at her, his eyes kind. "We were kids," he said simply. "People change." She smiled. "You did. So did you." As they walked their separate ways into the London night, both of them carried something unspoken, a connection rekindled not by memory, but by grace. Neither of them knew yet that their paths were not finished crossing. Winter settled over London like a heavy coat. The Thames shimmered under pale sunlight, and Christmas lights began to flicker along the streets. Life carried on, but for Emily, something had changed permanently. Subtly, quietly, like a shift in gravity. She had survived something she couldn't quite explain away. Every morning felt like borrowed time, and every sound of rain brought her back to that night. Yet, woven through the trauma was a thread of gratitude, for Daniel. For the boy she had once ignored, who had become the man who saved her life. She began to see him more often. Sometimes by coincidence, sometimes not. They'd grab coffee near the hospital when his shifts allowed it. Their conversations grew longer, lighter, more genuine. She learned that Daniel lived alone, that he'd never really left London, that he found peace in helping others because it was the one thing he could control. He learned that Emily's world was busy, restless, full of meetings and noise, yet lonely in ways she'd never admitted before. Their friendship grew in the quiet spaces between schedules. There was something healing about it, a balance. She brought laughter where his life had grown too heavy. He brought calm where hers had grown too frantic. Still there was a distance between them, not of emotion but of timing. Life had made them who they were, and neither was sure what to do with what was now between them. One evening after one of Daniel's long shifts, Emily invited him to a charity gala her company was sponsoring. For once, she joked, come somewhere that doesn't smell like antiseptic. He'd smiled, surprised but amused. You're sure I'll fit in with all your CEO friends? You'll be fine, she'd said. Just don't tell anyone you pull people out of burning cars for a living. You'll make the rest of us look useless. At the event, under warm lights and soft music, they stood on opposite ends of the hall. Daniel in a borrowed suit, Emily in a simple dark blue dress. She caught him watching her once or twice, that same quiet admiration still there, softened now by understanding. When the evening ended, they walked together along the south bank. The city lights rippled across the river. Emily hugged her coat tighter and glanced at him. You ever think about school? She asked suddenly. He chuckled. Sometimes. Usually when I'm reminded how bad I was at sports. I think about it more than I should, she said. I used to think it didn't matter. All those little moments. But I remember things now, small things. You answering questions no one else could. How patient you were when I talked too much. He smiled softly. I remember you laughing, he said. It made the class less gray. She looked down. I wish I'd been kinder. Daniel stopped walking. Emily, you don't have to keep apologizing for something that happened a lifetime ago. I know, she said quietly. But still. I do. The moment hung between them, warm, fragile, full of what-ifs. Then he said, almost under his breath, maybe it was meant to happen this way. She looked at him. What do you mean? If you hadn't ignored me back then, maybe I wouldn't have remembered you all these years. Maybe I wouldn't have been there when it mattered. She smiled, a real one, small and sad. So you're saying fate has a sense of irony? Something like that. Weeks turned into months. Their lives continued to weave together, but never quite fit neatly. He worked impossible hours, nights and weekends, always answering the call. She tried to keep up, meeting him when she could, bringing coffee to the station, waiting up for his messages that sometimes never came. One night, she called him after a long silence. Are you okay? I haven't heard from you in days. He laughed softly. Still alive. Just tired. You sound exhausted. I'll rest soon, he said. Promise. But promises are fragile things. A few nights later she got another call, this time from the hospital. There'd been an accident. Daniel's ambulance had been caught in a secondary crash while responding to a call on the motorway, the same stretch of road where she'd once almost died. He'd been injured protecting another paramedic, pushing them out of the way when the car hit. By the time Emily reached the hospital, her hands were trembling. She rushed through the halls, breathless, her heart pounding like it might break her ribs. When she saw him lying there, pale, still but alive, she felt the world tilt. He opened his eyes weakly as she sat beside him. Hey, he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. You scared me, she said, her voice shaking. He smiled faintly. Guess we're even now. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Don't you dare joke about this. I'm okay, he whispered. Just need some time. She took his hand, holding it tight. You saved me twice, Daniel. I don't know how to repay that. His eyes softened. You already did. How? She asked, confused. You remembered me. He recovered slowly, but something about him changed. The job, the risk, the constant weight of saving others. It had taken more from him than he'd ever admit. When spring came, Emily suggested he take a break. Get away from the city, from the noise, from everything. They spent a weekend by the sea, walking along the cliffs, the wind cold and clean. They talked about everything. Childhood, dreams, fears. And when the sun set over the water, she reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently. Emily, he said softly, you know we're not the same people we were back then. But somehow, you're still the one I think about when things get quiet. She blinked away tears. Then maybe we've both been waiting for the right time. He smiled, a small, tired smile that said more than words ever could. Maybe. That night they shared something wordless. Not a declaration, not a promise, but an understanding. That some stories don't need neat endings. That some people enter your life to save you, even if they don't stay forever. When she woke the next morning, the bed beside her was empty. Daniel had left early, a note on the table. Didn't want to wake you. Don't worry, just needed to go back. The world doesn't stop needing help. Thank you for reminding me why I do this. She read it twice, smiling through the ache. She knew him well enough now to understand. He wasn't running away. He was returning to who he was. They still met sometimes, coffee between shifts, quiet walks along the river. They never called it love, but it lived there. In glances, in silence, in everything left unsaid. And sometimes, when the rain fell over London and the city blurred into silver, Emily would whisper to herself, "He saved my life once. But maybe I saved his too."